Good morning. Ayin Beis, volume 3. We are on page. We finished the paragraph on top of page 1284. Aleph Resh Pei Dalet. So briefly, we're discussing the difference between neshamas, souls, and their role, and Torah mitzvahs in transforming this world, fulfilling its purpose. We know they both are atzmim, meaning they both come from the core divine intention, as opposed to the means. For example, the world itself is a means to an end. It's not an end in itself. And that means is that you build a building in order to live in it, to make a dira b'tachtein. So yes, the intention is in this world, that specifically this material world, this low world, the lowest of worlds, should be the place where this home, the divine home, is built. But but the way it's built, the very energy that is invested in building it, is what's called chitzenius ha'or. Reflecting, for example, when an architect or someone is building a home, the energy you invest in building the home is not quite the same internal energy that living in the home, which is the purpose of it all. So there's no question it's divine energy that creates Bereshis bara Lakim, but that's why it's called Elakim. Why not Bereshis bara Havaya? Because in order to create, you create with that simtsum dika, with a diminished flow of energy. Not just in order to create a structure, you need diminished flow, but also the very structure is reflecting the means for a deeper kavana. What's that deeper kavana? Like we say, Bereshis b'shvil Yisrael b'shvil HaTorah, in order to fulfill the purpose of creation. That's the pnimius dika or the pnimius haratzon, or in different words, atzmi. So Torah mitzvahs is rooted, as we said, in the ratzon, and tainug and ratzon atzmi. But neshamas are even higher. The ratzon, tainug, and neshamas, he made it clear on page 1282, which was coming to explain why a mitzvah alone, without the kavanah, without the mesiras nefesh, and b'chol ma'adecha, and all the love that neshama brings out to reveal its very core essence, why can't mitzvahs accomplish it themselves? So the previous paragraph he explained, because the mitzvahs themselves, on their own, only draw down the eris and the kelim. And in order to bring out from the etzem, from the inner dimension, you need an aveda that brings from that inner dimension. That's the aveda of neshamas, the etzem neshama. But in the next paragraph, he added, because the neshamas are actually rooted higher than mitzvahs. So even though the answer was already given, but it goes deeper and far more elaborate once you understand the root of neshamas. So briefly, the difference is that in etzem itself, meaning in the oyer lifnei tzimtzum itself, which is generally called atzmi, called the ba'atzmusei, because you don't have a tzimtzum yet. It's only the field of energy, the divine energy that God is emanating, and there's nothing else but God's energy. But in that energy itself, there's the two levels between Hu and Shmoy. Shmoy is Havaya. So Hu is a fundamentally concealed level, and soon we'll learn on page 1286 that that's the level where the neshamas are rooted. In who? But meanwhile, we're learning about Shmoy, that Torah mitzvahs is rooted in Shmoy and Havaya, in the oyer and the kelim of Havaya. And that's what the main focus has been on that level of Gili. Now, what does Gili mean here? Gili latzmuse. It's all within Lifnei Tzimtzum, and Atzil is the klolos, but it's already a Gili in order to transmit to a recipient. And what we learned yesterday was not only the Gili that he's preparing for the recipient, where the Eibishter is allocating and envisioning existence, but even the Gili la'atzmei, which is only to himself. The very fact that it's a Gili means it's also for the purpose of existence. So you have to say hishtalshalus, and everything that will come later is encompassed there. That's the word he used, iskalus ubehelam. It's all encompassed there. And that's why the halos man, the avoid of Torah mitzvahs, from below reaches that place. So just as it is in Atzilus de Proteus, in microcosm, that even Chachma, which is just the first revelation, is still Reishis Hagili. It's not Reishis Ishtalshlus like Bina, but it's already a Reishis Hagili, and that Chachma also has that element of being negay also to, it's also, as he said, the words were Chachmu Gilish L'Tzedek Ha'elim and Nivroim. Ultimately, it's also L'Tzedek Ha'elim, even though it's only the first beginning, Reishis Darka, Reishis Hagili. So, and that's why Halas Man reaches in Chachma. Same too in Atzilus the Klolos. I'm reading from the bottom lower part of page 1283. That's also Gili Deira and Sof. It's not the Helam of who. It's already a Gili la'atzma, yes, like Yud K. So even the Yud K also is ultimately the Tzedek Ishtalshlus, because the Eibishter Kavyochel does not need Gili. Ain't Tzedek Kavyochel shel la'atzma Kavyochel ain't Tzedek la'Gili, rak Gili Tzedek Ishtalshlus. Okay. So in the Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum itself, you have two levels of this Gili. There's the Gili as it is radiating to himself, but it's already a Gili, not who. That's completely concealed. And then there's the Gili that is already allocating and beginning to envision. He's envisioning and what's the word I used yesterday? And defining the 10 spheres for existence. That's the Vavke. So he's saying not only that lower level of Hashara al Klolos Hashtalshlus, but Gam Chinas Etzem ahead is also already even the Gili La'atzmai, where it's infinite spheres. Like I said about the artist, he can create the infinite spheres, and in that infinite, he said, so the defined 10 spheres is really part of the infinite possibilities. So the infinite possibilities, which is also a Gili to himself, that he wants to be an artist. So that all is rooted, is all connected to existence in some way. And he concluded on top of page 1284 that the oir of Mamala Kalalman, Nimshach Mebechinas Sevav Kalalman, that's exactly the word, the oir, Hagvul, which is Mamala Kalalman, that enters into existence and commensurate to this and tailored to the structure of existence, is rooted in the Bligvul, who Me'ena oir the Sevav Kalalman, as we learned at length earlier. And this earlier is primarily in the beginning of volume 1 of Ayin Beis. Okay. And we're still going to be discussing Shmoy and Havaya. As I said, only on page 1286, another 2 pages, where he goes back to Neshamas and Hu, and the level of the Helam. And we'll see then what Neshamas can attribute even higher than Torah mitzvahs. And that's when he'll conclude the full answer why Torah mitzvahs are not enough. But we're also getting here a fascinating side, the other side of the coin as well. Why are neshamas not enough? Because you want to have this gili. If you only have neshamas, you'd have, as we'll discuss later at length, but I want to just briefly sum it up, you would only have the etzem connection. Like I said, the son is fundamentally connected to his father, as he says in chapter 2 in Tanya. But Torah mitzvahs brings the gili, atzilus. It would be like having a neshama rooted in the etzem, but you don't have atzilus. So how do you know God? How can you know? Like we said, there's no gili. The whole purpose of atzilus is that we should know Ein Sof. And knowing and internalizing, that's the role of Torah mitzvahs. The etzem connection is deeper with the neshama, but the internalization happens through Torah mitzvahs. So they're both together. So you basically have the Chitzenia Se'er is creation, existence itself, which is our existence in this world. Torah mitzvahs reveals the atzmi, but the atzmi of Giluyim. And neshamis is the atzmi of atzmi. Even though it's still not ata, it's hu, but it's similar to the etzem because like the koiches hiyulim, it has atzmi in it that it defies a revelation. And the combination of all three, you have all the qualities. You have existence, you have the internalization of the divine, and you have the etzem through the neshamas. But it's not just the etzem neshamas. Torah mitzvah is also etzem, but etzem as it reflects itself already in a form of gili that we can relate to it. Okay.
So the Or B'Tachtenim could be only to neshama and Torah mitzvahs.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. For Tachtenim, all you need is creation. That's Tachtenim. Creation is Bar Elokim. Or even Gan Eden, that he created that B'yita Hashem Elokim Gan Be'eden. But La'ov the L'shamra creates the Dira, and by whom? The Adam, the Neshama Beguf, that does it. And that way you have all the milas. The love of the L'shama Torah mitzvahs brings all the Giluyim, and that's what we'll have in Gan Eden. And L'asad love will be the etzem of the mitzvahs will be revealed. And the Neshamis is itself the very etzem. And it makes sense because remember, Torah mitzvahs, without a Neshama activating them, are essentially static. What's a Torah and a mitzvah without a human being? You can't do a mitzvah without an Adam. Torah mitzvahs cannot perform themselves. So Torah mitzvahs is given to the human being through that to be Megala and reveal and refine the world, as we'll discuss now. He's going to now discuss even further what this level of Gilui is in Aveda. He's going to talk about that now. So we'll learn that right now on page 1284, the new paragraph from the top, 3 lines from the top, and the pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. Va'inyanhu. So again, he's going to continue to go till 1286. He goes back to the neshamas. Now, just to keep in mind, this is all going to be describing the process of what happens when you do a mitzvah, or you learn Torah. You're essentially being mamshich oiris into kelim. You take, let's say, tefillin, which is parchment. And that parchment from an animal hide has become holy, sanctified. You've written parshas on it and turned into tefillin. You do the mitzvah of tefillin. What happens? You mamshich something. You're drawing down moichin into midas, shibud halev ha'moyach, the different things tefillin accomplishes. That is critical because that's how you mamshich oiris, the divine energy, into containers. Ultimately, spiritual energy into the physical world, and through that you refine the world. This is the process of what Torah mitzvahs does. Birur and zichur ha'elam. And on a very, as we're going to learn on a basic level, this is Gilui of Oiris in Kalim, which is, as we learned, the first level, not the transformation of the Keli into an Oir. The Keli being a fitting Keli, that this material world, instead of it doing what it wants to do on its own, and selfishly indulging in our own interests and temptations, we align the world to God's will and God's wisdom. What the Torah says. Tayag mitzvahs, la'ovdo l'shamra, Ramach positive, 248 positive mitzvahs, 365 negative mitzvahs. And then including in that is also elevating even rishus, even the things that are neutral, where it's not prohibited, but it's also not a mitzvah, you're also aligning it to God's will. That's what Torah mitzvahs does. It guides us, it directs us, and instructs us how you transform this world into a dira b'tachten. In the language of Chassidus or Kabbalah, that's being mamshich, eris and kelim. If you don't do it, God forbid, the eris and kelim are not being joined together properly. And on the contrary, every avera separates eris and kelim. Like we learn in Basel Legani, that the Shechina is nostalgic. It gets concealed when a person sins, because a sin is a displacement. Aveda comes from the word displacement. It's like moving away from, a dissonance. Mitzvah comes from the word kesher, tzafsa v'chibur, connecting. So when we align ourselves, when we align the machine called existence, called life, to God's will, it's hamshach of eris and kelim. You're aligning existence with its purpose. Basically, what you do is aligned with who you are. Neshama and guf, eris and kelim. When God forbid a person doesn't do that, so you're disaligning, you're separating. There's a disconnect, like what happened by Chet Eitzadas. They disconnected to some extent. That suddenly they became separate from what God wants of them. And that's why Hashem says to Adam Arishan, Ayeko, where are you? He knew where he was, but where are you? You've betrayed your purpose. I don't recognize you and your purpose in life. So he's now going to explain this in more detail. So he says, Va'inyan hu. So after we've established that Atzilus is all about Gili, in L'Tseirach ha'elamis and ha'nivroim, as he said in the previous paragraph, he says, in the evolution and the process how the Esesphiris, which I said is the 10 building blocks of the art of the existence that God created, everything is encompassed in these 10 spheres. Asara Maimoris, Nivra is actually evolves from the 10 spheres. How do you do it? In this process, it's known that Tachta Nimtza Kol Tchila by Elyon. So the Esesphiris are not just disjointed stages of progression, they're actually, the lower level is always encompassed in the higher level. Like when you look at chains, links in a chain, they're not separate. Every link is linked to a previous link. So that alone tells you that the lower is encompassed in the higher. First, it's encompassed in the higher. So what is the process? First, it's encompassed in a higher level, and then from there, it exits and it merges from the concealed state to a revealed state. And that's the process of Vishtalshus of the Esesphiris. And he's going to explain this in detail. So this is relatively going to be a very Chabad explanation, not as esoteric and dense as some of the other pieces we've been learning, an explanation what this process looks like. All to come back to explain how Torah and mitzvahs are mamshech eris and kelim, and that's all rooted in the Yud Kei Vav Kei Havaya Lifnei Atzimtzum, which is the Gilui Ha'oir, even the Gilui La'atzmei, because even the Gilui La'atzmei, which is still concealed from the recipient, but it's for the purpose of the recipient. And their goal is to reveal all that into existence. That's basically where he's going with all of this. But it's all Mamala Kalaman, but Mamala Kalaman is rooted in Sevav Kalaman, like we just learned. The Shiur, the Einusef Abliya Shiur Ba'atzmei L'hoyer B'midav Gvul. So he's now discussing this process of what exactly, how that manifests in the Ishtalshlus. Now he's giving an example for the lower level being encompassed in the higher level. I mean, there are many examples, but just for example, you say Bria was first in Atzilus before it became Bria. Bina was first in Chachma before it became Bina. Midas were first in Moichin before they became Midas. So basically everything is included in a higher level, and from there it gets revealed. Something like, if you wish, think of a seed. A seed, even though the seed looks like one concentrated point, but in it lies everything that will grow out of the seed. A tree, its branches, its leaves, its fruits, whatever else the tree yields. So everything is included in an earlier level, and then it's revealed. You'll see how important this is later. We're going to learn that when it comes to neshamas, you're mamshech and chodash, but without that, there's no real new energy, because all energy is coming from a level that was previously concealed. That's really part of what the whole picture is. I'm just giving a little preview of where we're going to go with this. But right now, he's going to analyze this idea of ishtalshus of Esesphiris. So he says, like the mind and the emotions. The classic example of the cognitive and the emotional, Chabad, or Moichin and Zoh, or Moichin and Midas, Seichel and Midas. Ba'adam, in a person. Shamidas Shebelev, and again, before we continue, I always emphasize, it's important to underscore all the time that there are two types of Midas Chassidus talks about. We are accustomed to Midas being our natural emotions. You know, people have natural impulses. Here he's talking about midas that are nailed min haseichel, which we're not so accustomed to, because most of our midas are just our, as I said, our natural wiring. But there's also midas that are nailed min haseichel. They're born through someone contemplating. When you learn, because Chassidus expects and demands of a person not to just be an impulsive creature, that you should think before you act, before you feel. So he's talking about Shamidas Shebelev nailed in min haseichel. The midas in the heart are nailed them, give birth, are born from the seichel. The derech ilav va'ol. in a form of cause and effect. So the Meichen is the cause, like the Rambam says, how does a person come to Ava V'yira of God? Through Mizbonen, he's Mizbeinen, he contemplates on God's greatness. You want to appreciate something, you want to love something, or revere something, Ava V'yira, you need to contemplate. So the midas are nailed min haseichel b'derech ilav, cause and effect. It's not yesh ma'ayin. Ilav, the contrast to ilav is yesh ma'ayin. Yesh ma'ayin means the yesh and the ayin don't. The yesh doesn't recognize the ayin. The ayin is an invisible, mysterious force that creates something that's not like itself. Ilav means that the cause and the effect are more commensurate and proportionate to each other. So that's how it works. So this is only a gili me'ela. So even though midas themselves, emotions themselves, are different than moichin, and they have their own root, but the process of the midah emerging is a result that when you contemplate, let's say, on the quality of somebody, you think about a human being, you see their qualities, you appreciate them, and you're attracted, you're drawn to that person. And the same thing with other emotions. So he says, it's only gili me'helim. V'hainu, she'ein kol chodosh, that there's nothing new at all, the ikar mitziyusam b'yispayla shabalav, in the fundamental presence, in their fundamental existence, in the excitement or the stimulation in the heart. Ki kfar hoye klulim b'seichel, because they were already encompassed in the mind, b'seichel shebemoyach, in the intelligence in the mind. But there it was completely, they were united with the mind, these emotions. And there they're considered like something secondary, so-called overshadowed or completely overshadowed by the ikar, which is the mind itself. We'll explain this shortly, so let's just read inside. Because there the primary force is the revelation, the revealed intelligence. And therefore the midas, the emotions that they will generate, are not yet felt, are not felt there. They're not felt, and they're joined and merged with the seichel. So the seichel is the dominant force, and the midas are therefore concealed within it. They're not felt, and they're united with the seichel. Now you could ask. So let's, as I said, I want to finish the whole thing before we explain. Like we see in Aveda, in the service, when a person Aveda Sa'adam, an Aveda of a person, when he's the Kodim Shenispol Ba'ava V'yira, B'murgish Belev, that prior to him getting stimulated or aroused with a love and a reverence, B'murgish Belev, in a way that he palpably feels it in the heart, so first, he gets excited on an emotional, the emotional, what he says, which is a cognitive emotions. You can learn about something and get excited about it, but it doesn't mean that you're actually going to feel it in your heart where you're going to literally be attracted to it. We get excited about a lot of things that we don't actually ever pursue. It's an intellectual excitement. It's a cognitive excitement. There's a point where you learn something, you don't even get excited. You're just learning something. But let's say you learn something really geschmack, and it really makes sense. It's like I don't want to call it mind games, but the mind is deeply, deeply impacted and stimulated. And you like feel a certain sense of resonance and truth, and you get excited about the idea. It's a good idea. And it makes sense, and it answers questions, and it has a lot of implications. So he says, so before they came into a Murgid Belev and Aveda, he's talking now, it's Mispol B'Aviyida B'Sichle. So, for example, a person can't get excited about Atzilus if you don't learn about Atzilus. You know, being that we are not from that world, so someone will say, what's Atzilus? You say, I have no idea. You sit down, you start learning about it, and you contemplate on it, let's say during davening, what Atzilus is. The Atzilus, let's say, is a perfect world. It's a structure, but it's completely aligned with what God wants. Avram Avinu, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, like a Merkava. And you contrast it with the worlds that are lower, that are not completely aligned to godliness. And the more you learn about Atzilus, the more it can get exciting. It's an exciting reality. It's a very ideal type of world. It's like idealistic, like a utopia. Your mind can get very excited about that. And this is prior to it actually translating and traveling into the heart, like he says, now, why is he calling it Ava V'yira? Because your mind is attracted to this concept. And as well as Yira, you revere it. But it's not an emotional experience, it's an intellectual experience. The biyese makir umasik beire, being that he recognizes umasik and comprehends beire, his creator, shenispol b'meche, and in his mind he gets excited or stimulated. Bechedve elikis, with a divine chedve, pleasure, divine satisfaction, fulfillment. The chedve elikis, oi, biyira elikis, or a reverence. You know, like you find out something about someone and you revere them. Here he's talking about the Eibishter. So it either comes into a chedve elikis, a very deep joy or a deep pleasure or satisfaction. These are all the right words for chedve. Or yira elikis, a reverence. Yira here does not mean fear. We're talking about a reverence, a respect, an awe. I mean fear in the positive sense. Fear, I mean not as an afraid of a burglar or a mugger, a criminal. So this state that you're in, when you're contemplating and it's affecting your mind, this is called chesed v'gvura hamachusim b'seichel. Chesed and gvura, because there is a reaction. You can't say it's just purely, even though the mind is not emotional and it's objective, but there's a reaction. The mind has a reaction to something, and it gets stimulated by it, and it gets excited by it. So that's called chesed gvura mechusim b'seichel. Why? Because it's not yet chesed of good in the full sense of an emotion. It's concealed. It's mechusim. It's covered up in the seichel, like an object inside water, for example. Mechusim b'seichel. She'enim b'murgish. That's the key. It's not sensed palpably as an emotion. Now, it doesn't mean it's not sensed intellectually. Intellectually, absolutely, it's sensed. That's why you feel excited. But a chesed gvura as an emotion, in a full emotion where you are now drawn to follow it. For example, what would be the next step would be that because your mind is excited about it and it's developed an attraction, an intellectual attraction, or a pleasure in this thing, and reverence, then you act on it. Your emotions then are drawn. Now you want to have a full relationship with God, in an emotional relationship. So that would be the step when it comes into midas. But the case he wants to make here is that even before it comes into actual palpable feelings, it's there concealed within the mind in what he calls chesed gvura mechusim now. The seichel she'ena b'murgish. Ki yadua, as it's known, u'kamashon is bar le'il b'kama duchtin. And as it was explained earlier in a number of different discourses. Kama duchtin or kama drushim, as I always point out. Duchtin is probably the correct word, but it's the same idea in Aramaic. Kama duchtin. Means he explained it a number of times earlier in Hemshech, Ayin Beis, which he did. Okay, so that's the first example for iskalulus, that something on a lower level is encompassed on a higher level, and it's not chidush, it's not utterly new, it's emerging from something where it was earlier concealed. Now he's going to give al derech zeh, another example, within the same example, val derech zeh. So it's not another example. It's in the same thing. Nichlalu ha'oisius hamachshava belev k'shemispol belev. That when a person now is excited and mispol in the heart, In there is encompassed letters of thought. These letters of thought are called hirhure libe, the thoughts of the heart. Now, a heart, you could say, seemingly has nothing to do with thought. Thought would seem to be a cognitive experience, but that's not accurate. A person could have, for example, a person has hirhure aveda, taivas. It's not just in the mind. The heart is thinking about something that it's tempted or being seduced by. So yes, it begins in machshava in the mind, but it's hirhure libe. It's thoughts of the heart, emotional thoughts, so to speak. So he says, so the oisius hamachshava are included in this, in the heart, k'mishpal belev, she'ein kol chodesh behirur oisius hamachshava came klulin behevel halev v'lo yoyanikir. I'll explain this in a moment. It's based on Tanya Perek Yud Beis and other places. Okay. So there's nothing new in this thought of that you're thinking the letters of thought, because it was all encompassed in the Hevel Halev, in the cavity of the heart, the Lo Yoya Nikir. But it wasn't obvious yet. It wasn't Nikir. What he's saying here is the following. That when a person has an emotional desire for something, emotion now, before the example was it started with the intellect, emotional desire for whatever it may be. What happens is it does turn into hirhurim, thoughts, that you begin thinking about it. You can even obsess about it. I mean, this is not necessarily something negative. It could also be a positive emotion. He says, but what's most obvious when you have that desire is the desire. It's not what the details of the letters of the thought that you're thinking about it. Just as it is in ideas. When you think of an idea, even though they're letters, but the letters in the level of machshava are not that nikir. I'm not sure why he's not using oisius machshava in moyach, but regardless, but the same idea. When you think of an idea and the idea is very all-consuming, even though there are letters, because we always need letters to appreciate something, to break it down, but it's not like letters of speech or letters that you write down. There, the letters are very dominant and very obvious. And they're the contrary. The letters are the primary thing. And someone reads the letters, and from that, they go back to the idea. But the person who's conceived of the idea, first comes the idea, and well, I should say the idea has letters, but the letters are like subsumed within the idea. So he's saying the same thing is in the heart. When a person has an emotion, a strong emotion, there's hirhure alev, hirhure libe. There are thoughts involved, but the thoughts which break down into letters, oisius hamachshava, because every thought consists of some type of structure. You know, every is subsumed and somewhat overshadowed by the very emotion itself. As I said, why doesn't he bring the example just oisius hamachshava? Maybe because he already spoke about the mind. He wants to give an example in the emotions. But maybe it'll be understood. But meanwhile, that's what he said. You called chile behevel alev. I'm sorry. Ki yoiklun behevel alev lo yoya nikir. V'chein hevel hadibur how you called chile behevel alev. And the same thing, hevel hadibur, the breath of speech. So the way Chassidus explains the breath, when a person needs to speak, you can't just say words, you also breathe the words. They come from your lungs. And it's explained that it also comes from the hevel, the cavity within the heart. So the heart also has, so to speak, a cavity, and together with the lungs produces a hevel, which ultimately turns into a hevel hadibur, the breath of speech. But it was first encompassed, first in a breath in the heart, before it became a breath of speech. So here too you see the idea that something first exists in an earlier level, it's not obvious there, but then it emerges to the next level where it becomes obvious, where it becomes revealed from the concealed. And he explains this piece as follows. Ki harkova hagashmis, the eish mayim ruach, shebehevel kel hadibur, b'murgish l'zulase. This combination, harkova gashmis, for breath to work properly, it needs to have an element of warmth, eish, an element of moisture, mayim, and it needs ruach, like wind, air. So really, the breath of a person combines all three. There's an element of Eish, Mayim, and Ruach. That's why you see it's like a warm, when you breathe out, you blow out. It has moisture in it, and it has Eish, and it has and Ruach. That combination that's necessary, as he says, Shebehevel Kel Adibur, in the breath of the voice of speech, B'murgish l'sulose, which is felt and sensed by another. When I'm speaking right now, you hear me speaking. And my speech is made up of these three elements. Hu oisei hevel shebelev. It's exactly the same level of the hevel shebelev, the breath in the heart. However, there it's ba'arkovet the eish mayim ruach ruchni. There, the combination is far more sublime and far more ethereal. Like, in other words, if you go to the way the breath develops in the lungs and the heart, and the beat of the heart, you're not going to find quite the same type of physical combination of Eish Mayim Ruach Begashmis. It'll be much more ethereal, much more sublime, much more subtle. So here too you see that there was concealed in the Hevel Halev, and when it comes in actual speech, it becomes now revealed in a very manifest and tangible and palpable way. Okay, let me stop here for a moment if anybody wants to ask anything. So far he's given three examples that I count. One is the midas, emotions as they're encompassed in the mind. Number two, the thought, the letters of thought that are encompassed in the hirhuri liba, in the emotions of the heart. And the third now is how speech, the breath of speech is included first in the breath of the heart. But let's, any questions? Now you could ask the question, why does he need all these examples and why is it such an elaboration? But I would wait till we finish the subject and probably become clear how this is all going to help us understand what we learned till now, which is the Gilui Helem, or what he's talking about, the Gilui of the Helem in the level of world of Gilui and Ishtalshlus of the Esesphiris, even from the highest levels of Gilui, that all encompassed in the highest level. And it's not a real, completely new energy. And that's what Torah Mitzvah is going to draw down. But we haven't got there yet. So meanwhile, he's still elaborating. And the parentheses now, I see he goes further into that concept of Havolim. That's why I stopped. I wanted to just... does anyone know how this actually works? I know the breath of a person is definitely coming from the lungs. But I remember reading, from my good old high school years, that the breath of the oxygenation of the lungs, meaning the breath of lungs, is connected also to the heart. Not just that it oxygenizes the blood, but also the breath and it all involves the heart and lungs ultimately turn into breath. Anyone familiar with exactly how that works?
Well, it's like a pump, right?
Yeah.
That's all I got to say.
I'm just wondering if anyone actually knows. I mean, I could guess what it means, because the heart does have valves, and it has different ventricles, and it has the right chamber, the left chamber, and it works. It's definitely connected to the lungs. The lungs and the heart are always working with each other. So I think there's a process of how that ultimately develops into the breath that we breathe out. So when we exhale, we're exhaling the carbon monoxide, that is the toxins. And when we inhale, we're inhaling, it goes through the lungs into the heart, and then vice versa. So there's something there in the process. I'm just wondering if anybody knows the exact dynamics. I'm sure it's easy to look up. But since he's talking about it, I just wanted to know how it's understood scientifically today.
Well, while we're on the topic, I have a question about one of his muscles, the second one, because it seems to be conflicting with the first one. The osias amochin that they're hayam klulim b'hevel and
Oisius hamachshava, not moichin. Oisius hamachshava.
Sorry, I misread it, but the letters of thought are included in the breath of the heart. Before he said that the midos are included in the mochin, in the thought. In order to have a hisorus balev, you have to first think about it when you're doing tefillah. but this seems to be saying that the osios of the thought are included in the heart. It's sort of the opposite, isn't it?
Yeah, because by a human being, we could also work the other way. It doesn't mean we always follow our minds. That's the difference between the animal soul and the divine soul. The whole point is that the animal soul, yes, is driven by emotions, and those emotions in turn create those thoughts.
Got it.
So it just comes down, just different, yeah.
Got it.
Today's Tanya explained it, and you have to be a real being and need to have this process all the time. Today's Tanya, exactly.
What I was wondering, because in Tanya it says that first comes Hirur and then comes Machshava. The bottom line is, even when you have a complete, all-consuming, obsessive desire for something, lust or desire, completely emotional, I'm talking now, and nothing to do with the mind, that also a human being thinks about it. It's not like just you have the emotion. The emotion has a thought involved. It's just not an objective thought. It's not a thought that's controlling. It's not moyach shalat ala lev. It's lev shalat ala moyach. In other words, the mind is not controlling the emotion like it should be. There, the emotion is driving everything. But the emotion in a human being is involved thought. Look at anyone who's, let's say someone has a real tremendous desire for something. Again, kedusha, not kedusha, either way. They devise all kinds, their thoughts begin to become consumed with it, and they can even be very ingenious in pursuing how they're going to get this desire fulfilled. So there is machshava, and eshis machshava, however, is being driven, it's an emotion that's in control here.
It's driven by taiva. Yes, I get it.
Yeah, that's what I think the main difference here is. Is it driven by the taiva, or is it driven first by thinking about God, and that leads to an excitement that ultimately gives birth to an emotion? He doesn't quite distinguish it that way, but it's pretty clear that's what he's saying.
There could be a positive side of it. It could be a positive thing, like a positive side of that's causing
It could be, for example, a person has a tremendous desire to learn Chassidus, and your heart is just drawn to it. And then, but my point is that even emotions need the structural elements of thought to just even figure it out. Like, just a feeling has also thought in it. Machshava is also associated with emotions, just as it is associated with intellect. Yeah. So Hevel Shebel Havolim.
I looked it up on the internet about the heart and lung thing. Just give me 2 seconds here. It says here that the right side of the heart picks up the oxygen-poor blood from the body and moves it to the lungs for cleaning and reoxygenating. Once the blood is reoxygenated, the left side of the heart moves the blood throughout the body so every part receives the oxygen it needs.
Right.
That's all.
Yeah. We that's what I thought. We discussed this. Also, the Rebbe has an interesting response. People ask the question. It says in chapter 9 in Tanya that the right side of the heart doesn't have blood in it. It's only in the left side of the heart. And the Rebbe explained this point, that the blood is really generating the left side, but the right side has the blood, but it's focused more as the oxygenation of that blood and the
That's
mixing
right.
of the right. Okay. Being that it's 10:30, there's a parenthesis now that talks about Havolim, but it's not going to take a minute to read. So I would stop here before the parentheses. We're going to talk about the Zayin Havolim and Ak. This is a little more esoteric material, but clearly the Rebbe Rashab wants to bring it into the picture. So I would reserve that. We'll start on Sunday from the Kiyadua and the parentheses. But he's going to continue. This continuing discussion is all about this Galulus. Like, remember, he used the words earlier that you have to say, he said, Shayach Leimer, the Ishtalshlus, Shushamchins, Iskalus, Vehelim. That Ishtalshlus is encompassed and concealed all the way in the Gili La'atzmei of Yudke, even the highest levels before the Tzimtzum. So he's really explaining that Hiskalus and Helim, how it's throughout Ishtalshlus like that. And then he's going to bring it back to the discussion how it is in the highest levels of Gili. Even the Gili that's about Tzmuse, or Gili Atzmuse. Okay, so that's just to put it into some context here. Okay, we'll stop here before the parentheses. Are there any other questions?
I had a question from yesterday's Shiur. You were talking about, let me find it. Halas Maim Nukvim, Magia Ad Bechines Chochma Kinoida. So the Indian there was that the Chochma is the beginning of Gilui, but I don't understand what compels the notion that even if the Gilui begins with Chochma, that whatever the arousal from below or the sort of the halas the Maim Nukmi sounded like it's our efforts to reach up to the Eibishter. I'm sorry if I'm paraphrasing in a very bad way, but
there's one key line that you missed, and that is the reason that Chachma is the beginning of Gili, and the fact that it's Gili, that means that's due to the fact, because the Gili of Chachma, even though it's the highest level and it's just the first emergence of a concept, of a flash of an idea, is l'tzerech ha'elis v'nivroim l'chein magia. So the whole purpose of Chachma was to reveal, and for the purpose of existence. So therefore, existence work affects it, because
no. But this is my question. No. That's exactly my question.
That's the whole point. That the Gilui is for the world. So the world's work affects that level.
No, but that's not the question. The question is, it makes sense that if the Gilui is l'tzorach alamas anivraim, that it would make sense that Chachma reaches the below, but it doesn't mean that doesn't.
No, absolutely means that, because of course it means that, because the whole purpose of the Gili is for the worlds to do their work. What means the
I'm talking the opposite. I understand that
the whole purpose of the whole section, you're talking about the whole section is coming to explain that even the highest Gili, even the Gili to himself, is also for the purpose of the worlds. What does that mean? That the world should know God and should experience God. In other words, that the world should do halas man. So therefore, since the highest level is negated, the whole purpose is the worlds and the work of the worlds to do halas man. Therefore, their work touches it. If it was not negated to it, it wouldn't be. Why should the Veda of the world be connected to the highest level? But the whole purpose of it is the worlds. And the world, what's the purpose? That the world should know God, should experience God, should have Allah Asman.
I see. So if
Chachma is a mamuta, right? Between the high worlds and down here. It's one of them, one of the interfaces.
Two things, one thing at a time. Let's first get what Yitzchak wants.
My question was, you think you answered it. My question was, I understand how it goes from top to bottom, but you're saying if in fact
I'm saying if you read the whole piece, you'll see it says it several times.
I know it does. My question goes the other way. I
answered the question, I didn't answer. Yeah. Did I answer it?
No, you answered. He said if the Gilui of Chachma. All right. Yeah.
I'm saying, but I'm answered it. Why are we going over the question again?
Well, it's not clear to me why, just because it's revealed for the sake of revelation of godliness below, that therefore below must know that particular lever.
So then I didn't answer your question.
Yeah.
Well, so I'll repeat what I just said, and you can listen to it. It's well recorded. The revelation below means halas man. That's what it means. Who cares about a revelation below? It's in order for existence to connect to God. Halas man is just another word for connecting to God.
I see.
So the highest levels of Gili is Negeya, that the low is the whole purpose of that Gili, not just Negeya. The whole purpose of that Gili is that the world below is for the purpose of existence, so existence should connect, which means the same words as Allah's man to God. That's the
wishes the greatest tainug.
Okay.
Halas man means that's what the world, that's the purpose. That the world should have Halas man connecting to God.
Right. I get that, but the question is halas means a raising up of my mind, which is
No,
which is the
halosma means
low.
the purpose of Gilui is the Aveda of this world. Aveda of this world means halosma.
And what implies that the work of this world necessarily reaches Chachma V'Tzilas?
Okay.
That's I'm asking the opposite direction.
Okay, I hear you, but I have nothing more to say.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, so we'll stop here before the Kiyadua on page 1284. Any other questions?